I started my talk with the Joan Peters from time immemorial. And it's appropriate that I end it with the Alan Dershowitz, The Case for Israel. Now, Dershowitz has a serious name. He's a Felix Frankfurter Professor of Law at Harvard Law School. Chair, Felix Frankfurter Chair. He's the highest-ranking professor at Harvard Law School, a very distinguished position. He published the book, The Case for Israel, with John Wiley, a reputable press. The book received excellent reviews. And the book is, from start to finish, beginning, in my opinion, with the author's name, and all the way to the last full stop, the book is a sheer fraud. I don't believe he wrote the book, and as I've told him to his face, I don't even think before you debated me, you read the book. You have no idea. He had no idea what was in the book. I mean, I knew what was in the book. He did not. Later, after I debated him on a program called Democracy Now!, he went around telling all the newspapers that he was ambushed. And you know what? He had an argument there. There was an argument, because it was unfair. Because when he debated me, I had read the book and he hadn't. That was an ambush. It was really unfair. The whole book is sheer nonsense. It's an interesting kind of nonsense. The first 2 chapters, they're plagiarized whole cloth. Now, some of you are thinking, plagiarism, who cares? When I was in college, I plagiarized too. Thank God I wasn't caught. Yeah, okay. And there's an argument to be said. I was a young person. I still, deeply respect and admire the folk singer Pete Seeger. Some of you may know him. And Pete Seeger's father was a famous musicologist, Charles Seeger. And Pete Seeger used to like to quote his father, Charles Seeger, to the effect that, quote, plagiarism is basic to all culture. Which is to say, if you know folk music, how you could see how everybody's copying everybody's tunes and so on and so forth. And so you may not get so exercised about the issue of plagiarism. But there are 2 peculiarities with Dershowitz. First of all, even if you don't get yourself exercised about plagiarism, it happens as everybody who's gone to college, and I think probably most of this audience has, in university life, plagiarism is a big deal. It's about the only thing where you suffer a significant penalty, to the point of being expelled. So, for example, with the university where I currently teach, the syllabus, apart from what books you're going to read, what weeks, grade computation, the one thing every syllabus has to include is a large section on penalties for plagiarism. They take plagiarism very seriously in the university. For better or for worse, that's a separate issue. And Dershowitz plagiarized, no question about it, large chunks of those first 2 chapters. But that's the beginning of the story. The end is, or I should say the middle is, he plagiarized from Joan Peters from time immemorial. The guy plagiarized a hoax. Now, that's pretty shameful. You really, in academic life, you can't get much worse. It's like you're submitting a book in the Nazi Holocaust, and you're submitting a paper in the Nazi Holocaust, and you plagiarize the protocols of the elders of Zion. That's pretty shoddy. He plagiarizes a hoax. There's no question about it. I mean, I have, as it happens, to use that expression, the smoking gun. By accident, I stumbled on the smoking gun. Large parts of the book, if you compare the first 2 chapters of his book with the Joan Peters, it's all the same quotes, and he doesn't say from Joan Peters, he cites her source, these 19th century travelogues from the Middle East. So he cites, from Burckhardt, from him, from her, and she cites from Burckhardt, from him, from her, and you align them, it's exactly the same. So he says, well, not true, Finkelstein's making it up, because yes, I saw it in Peters' book, but I checked it on my own. So he claims that because he saw it, he checked what he saw in Peters' book, it's not plagiarism, which is already absurd. Anyone who knows anything about academic life, let's say somebody writes a book which has 10,000 footnotes, And then you reproduce exactly the same book with the 10,000 footnotes using the original sources, not as cited in. And you claim that's your original research. You'd laugh. What do you mean your original research? Even if you went back and checked the sources, you're pretending you did research when you didn't. Okay, but that's not the end of the story. It happened by coincidence that in publishing life, there's this thing called advanced proofs. And advanced proofs is basically this. Authors and publishing houses like to have reviews timed to come out the day of what's called the publication date of the book, the pub date. It helps promote the book. And often the book is not yet ready several months in advance. Authors are still working on the book. So they send out what's called advanced proofs, which is an incomplete version of the book that you give to a reviewer. He or she will now have several months to look at the incomplete version and then write a review to be timed when the complete version comes out on the pub date. I hope that's clear, okay? So by coincidence, somebody sends me an email and says, I have a copy of the advanced proofs for Dershowitz's book. You want to look at it? And I said, well, what the hell not? Send it. Maybe something interesting there. I open it up, and it happens in this advanced version, they hadn't yet filled in all the footnotes, but they had filled in some. And it says he has his research assistants' names. One is a woman named Beth. He says, Beth, footnote 7, cite from page so-and-so or from time immemorial. Well, there's not much ambiguity left now. He didn't go back to the original. It's right there. He's copying right up her book. What's interesting is it all came out because the internet has democratized life a little bit. It all came out. Some people wrote about it. And the reviews, I had already gone through the book before the reviews came out. They came out mostly belatedly in the New York Times, the Boston Globe, and the Washington Post. They all knew about the fraud. It was known. If you put it on the web, on the Google, Finkelstein Dershowitz, you'll get like 3,000 hits, which is something. It's not a lot, but it's something. It was widely publicized. It didn't affect the reviews at all. Nothing. It was a non-event. Nobody mentioned it. Book is excellent. Maybe a little partisan, but still an excellent book. Didn't touch it all. That's the plagiarism. Large parts of the book are just sheer fraud. I'll tell you, I was kind of surprised at that. I really was. In the case of Joan Peters, okay, she took real documents and she doctored them. So when there was a not somewhere in the middle of a sentence, she put the ellipsis, ... Okay, not very good. But at least, okay, but to her credit, we may say, at least she's citing real documents. With Dershowitz, it's just out of thin air. He takes a case, I'll just give you an example. There was on the issue of torture and Israel's use of torture. There was a famous case in 1995 of a fellow named Harazat, a Palestinian who was shaken to death. And it became a national issue in Israel because the shaking was one of their torture techniques, fairly widely practiced. Rabin, at that time, estimated that 8,000 Palestinians had been subject to this form of torture called shaking. And Harazat died from it. And it became a national issue in Israel after his death. And multiple pathologists examined the body. There were two pathologists who first examined the body from Israel itself, a third from Dundee University in Scotland, Derek Pounder. He examined the body. Then they all concurred, died from shaking. Then the Justice Ministry of Israel came out with a statement and said, died from shaking. They disputed whether or not the interrogators could have known in advance that the shaking would have proven ultimately lethal, but they don't deny it was from shaking. Then it went to another Tel Aviv pathologist, yet another person named Liss. He said died from shaking. Then there was a famous Supreme Court case on the issue of torture, and the High Court of Justice, it says in its decision, all agree died from shaking, meaning all parties, the state and the petitioners, all agree died from shaking. You go to Dershowitz's book, he says he didn't die from shaking. He died from a pre-existing medical condition as confirmed by an independent investigation. And what does he cite? He cites the High Court of Justice decision. But the decision said, all agreed, died from shaking. And you go through the book. I've been going through it because I'm writing now a book on him. I am. He's putting up a stiff fight. I only have a couple of seconds' time. He's putting up a stiff fight. He's, a great civil libertarian, Mr. Dershowitz. He sent first a 5-page, single-space letter to my publisher telling them why they should not publish the book, although he says, I'm all for free speech. But he says, if there is, he implies, if there is publication of the book, there is massive libel in the book. Just want you to know, he keeps saying, I'm putting you on notice. I'm putting you on notice. You're on notice. But of course, he says, I'm for free speech. And then he sent another letter, 5 pages, single space, a separate one. I mean, the man's gone berserk. He's ballistic now. To all the members of the editorial board. Again, and he asked, I won't go through the details, but, he's a slightly desperate man, I think, at this point. But what's really astonishing is it's the level of fraud which simply passes as scholarship in our society on this subject. And what's also, that's astonishing, but it's also for those of us who want to find a silver lining in the cloud, a light at the end of the tunnel. There is something there which should give us lots of hope. And that's how I'll conclude my remarks. What should give us hope is the following. People used to ask me when I discussed the Dershowitz case, they said, why did he do something like that? There he is at Harvard. He has all these research assistants. He has so much money, so much access to resources. Why didn't he just hire fact checkers to clear out all the debris, all the nonsense from the book? I thought that was an interesting question because it tells us a whole lot. What's the most striking thing about Dershowitz's book, he devotes about 1/3 of it to human rights issues. Torture, house demolitions, political liquidations, what's called targeted assassinations, all that sort of stuff, the human rights issues. And it's very striking that even though he devotes 1/3 of the book to that, he never once, literally never once, on any of these factual, moral, or legal questions bearing on human rights, never once can he cite a single mainstream human rights organization to support his claim. He can never cite Amnesty International in support of his argument. He can never cite Human Rights Watch in support of his argument. He can never cite the multiplicity of Israeli human rights organizations. Why can't he? Why didn't he? Not because he doesn't want to. He's smart enough to know if you can get Amnesty on board on your side, that's a big plus. It's not that he doesn't want to. It's that he can't. And that's the most devastating insight, but the one that should give us hope. If he actually cited what the documentary record shows, if he actually cited what the human rights record showed, he couldn't have called his book The Case for Israel. It would have to have been called The Case for Palestine. Thank you.